Please welcome William Mugire, the business blockchain, Edward Budd, Deutsche Bank, Ian Lee, Director, Head of Citi Global Lab Network and Acceleration Fund, Citi Ventures, Scott Manuel, Thomson Reuters, Bart Sokes, Phillips, and Jeremy Wilson, Barclays.
Good morning. So let's get to it. This is the panel called Internal Strategies, Internal Approaches for Blockchain Strategies, or as I like to call it, hand-waving as a blockchain strategy. So if you're a startup and you're involved in the blockchain, it's very easy. You just take it like duck to water. But if you work for a big company, it might take an act of God to get the company moving into the blockchain direction. So we have a panel here of leaders, shepherds, blockchain czars, and pioneers in their own organizations. So to start the panel, I've asked each one of them to tell us what they are doing internally, how they are organized, and why did they organize in a particular way. I mean, there's no right or wrong way of starting with the blockchain in a big company. Every approach has its merits. So let's start with less than 2 minutes each. Tell us what's the name of your group and how you interact with the rest of the organization, and give us like the lay of the land. And then the second question will be about lessons. So don't go into lessons and best practices yet. Just give us the lay of the land. And if I may ask Mr. Jeremy Wilson to start.
Oh, thanks very much, William. Yeah, thanks for starting with me. Maybe if I could just pick up from where Matthew Bishop was talking yesterday from The Economist on the panel, where that panel really divided the universe, I guess, into three broad categories. And certainly in things like this and phenomena like this, this seems to be the way these things do work out. So you get the newcomer who really gets it right and gets very big. You get the Googles and the Amazons of this world. Then you get, in the case particularly of what we're talking about here, which is the financial services industry, you get the incumbents, the people who are already doing business but absolutely realize there needs to be a change. And then you get those who simply don't get it at all. Now, I would say that my institution, my organization, Barclays, would consider itself to be in the middle. It absolutely understands there is something fundamental going on here, even if we don't fully understand all the angles, and indeed recognize that we're in the very, very early foothills of this thing. So the question then becomes, how do you tackle something like that? And if I just use the example that I see in a big institution like this, the first thing is that the leadership, the people at the top, have to say, we think something is going on here. We are probably the last people to really understand the detail of this. It's much more likely that lower down in our organization, there are going to be people who get it. So what we have to do as leaders is we have to establish the latitude for our own businesses and our own people then to do what needs to be done. So I think the first step in this is that simple single message. Whatever you do, support your own people when they start moving in that direction. You've then got to recognize one of the simple challenges that this particular industry, the banking industry, faces. And that is that it is heavily regulated. And it's heavily regulated for a very good reason. It's heavily regulated because money is a very volatile and, as we've all seen, a very toxic commodity. And yet it is an instrument or a device that affects every single person on the planet. So it has to be heavily regulated, which means inevitably that there is a certain degree of rigidity in a big bank. And so whilst you've got to give latitude to your people, whatever you do, you must make sure that they don't get into a situation where they are likely to cause systemic risk in the bank or in the industry as a whole. And you have to work very hard with regulators to make sure that that piece is addressed. Now, I'm conscious of time here, and there is a lot of us, William. So
quickly, Jeremy, how did you get organized inside Barclays to tackle the blockchain? Your role versus Simon Taylor and others, just briefly.
Sure. So what we did, it's interesting listening to the moderator at that distance and the loudspeakers over there. I think I got the question, is how do we organize ourselves then? Once that latitude is given, once you know you're working in an environment where the organization is listening from the top down, we then decided, well, one of the things we ought to do was to get all those people from around the group, this is a large group with a lot of diverse activities, into one room, who believed and felt that there was something going on here that was of interest. And we called it a Distributed Ledger and Blockchain Council. And it deliberately spanned all the silos in the group. Now, that takes a bit of a feat in itself, because organizations are fairly rigid. But that council drew on what turned out to be existing pools of knowledge, expertise, and skill dotted all over the group. People who had picked this up early and had been working away, and in some cases simply didn't know where to go to make it move forward.
Great.
The consequences of that were, I'll stop. I mean, as I say, we've got other banks here who may have similar experiences, and I don't want to take up all the time, William.
That's great. That's a good lay of the land. And Bart, you've taken a blockchain labs approach, so tell us about it.
Yeah, so our lab was founded in January after, I think, 7 or 8 months of exploration. We were originally founded out of IT, looking at, so what is the next big thing on a 3 to 5 to 10 year timescale? And in healthcare, which is, I think it's even more heavily regulated than banking, we have a lot of problems in dealing with data across silos. So what we wanted to do is unlock that data from that silo. And blockchain seems like a pretty good way to do that. So we asked ourselves the question, so is this something we should be interested in? And the answer was yes. And the goal of the lab is to create a framework which is not only technical, but also contains strategy and legal. And to really answer the question, so if this is of value, how should we go about this? And what are the consequences, and how should we architect our solutions, et cetera. And we have a small team of 8 people, and they are cross-functional. So we really try to run it as a startup. So T-shaped people, just trying to move fast, pivot fast, because the ecosystem is so volatile, and we really want to create a bridge between this massive enterprise organization and this really fast-moving ecosystem, and try to sieve out all the hype from the reality.
So is the labs part of the innovation group, or give us an idea, where do you sit in the organization, and why did you choose the labs approach?
So we actually report directly into a steering committee, which contains IT, legal, a number of business groups, our innovation group. So it's really trying to get a broad buy-in from the entire company at the right level, so that inside the lab, inside the confines, we can actually act in relatively autonomous fashion.
Great. Scott, Thomson Reuters, what's going on there?
So Thomson Reuters is both a financial services information company, as well as selling data and products into other verticals as well: legal, tax and accounting, intellectual property, and science. So the way that we've organized, William, is I'm in a group and run product management for a group called Applied Innovation. And applied is a very important word. We're focused on productization, right? And that's the ultimate driver, is how are we going to bring products to market? And it's multidisciplinary as well. I think that's the key to this. It's UX, it's engineers, it's product people, it's the whole stack that you need to execute, as well as not just blockchain, right? We focus on cognitive computing, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality. So we're not just looking at a problem set through a laser beam of one particular technology to solve it, but have sort of widened that lens. And again, it's all driven about where will we be in 3 to 5 years and what's the product that we need to be executing against.
So you work a lot with the product managers within. So do you find yourself going to them, or are they coming to you?
It's a little bit of both. For a technology like blockchain that requires a lot of education to really understand what's going on, and as everybody in this room knows, it's changing at such a rapid pace that even if you are well educated, you were well educated yesterday, and what happened, what's happening today. We have found that education component raises a lot of questions. The other thing that drives inbound is customers. So customers are reading all the same trade press or the Wall Street Journal or whatever, and are coming to us through the business units, through our salespeople. So it's a little bit of both, us reaching out as well as them coming.
But can you mention 1 or 2 examples? Because this conference is about making the blockchain real. So we want to talk as much as possible about examples. And I know you've announced 1 or 2 initiatives. Is there anything concrete that is real that you're going to be doing with the blockchain?
Specific use cases, things
Yes.
that we're actually working towards. So we very much have been building proof of concepts and prototypes at this stage, right? We got to maybe talk a little bit later about deploying things. But in the proof of concept and in the prototyping world, we've been looking at things like assets, right? Asset transfers. How can we leverage blockchain for assets of all types and not just financial services? Land registries is a very important one, right? We have a business focused on land registries. How could it potentially be leveraged for that? We also have a very big data business. We're into creating, providing data into the financial services organization. So it'd be natural for us to think about smart oracles and how does our data fit into that ecosystem to execute smart contracts.
Great. Ian, you work for a very diversified bank that's very global. What are you doing at Citibank?
Yeah, so I'll first start out because I think I had a very confusing title with a lot of words in it. But Citi Ventures is really the venturing and innovation arm of Citigroup. So we set up shop actually in 2008 in Silicon Valley, which is where I'm based. We were one of the first banks to kind of have a presence locally in Silicon Valley. And we, our mission is really to modernize and improve Citigroup, and by extension, financial services for the industry and our customers, and we do that through a couple different ways. The first is we invest in startups, so we have an active portfolio of about 30 companies where we bring the outside in. And we also have a number of programs, one of which I lead, which is the Global Lab Network, where we are building things inside and trying to take them out. In addition to that, I run what we call the Acceleration Fund, which is essentially an internal seed fund. And the purpose of that fund is to enable experimentation within the lab network in areas that our businesses would not be comfortable stepping into at an early stage. So that's effectively enabled us to do things in, for example, artificial intelligence, more recently augmented reality. But blockchain is actually something that we've been researching in our labs for the past 2.5 years. So we started researching primarily decentralized cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and others in early 2014 to understand how that technology might potentially impact our biggest customers, including governments around the world, central banks, and also some of the largest institutions. And so what started out as really a technology research experiment has then informed a deeper understanding of the technology, the opportunities, the risks, some of the issues that have yet to be resolved. And kind of where we're at now is I also lead a cross-enterprise working group that many other financial institutions, I'm sure here, have as well, where we are now sort of managing a portfolio of experiments, in some cases, more active investments to drive kind of a strategy in the blockchain space.
Can you mention 2 or 3 of them that are internal? What are the areas that you're looking at I think you mentioned identity at one point. And
Yeah, I mean, let me contextualize it like this. I mean, one of the things that we've learned about this technology over the past, several years is that, we absolutely think of this as a financial network technology. And as a result, what that means is it has network effects. And if you think about what that implies, going back to what Jeremy mentioned earlier, is network effects have learning advantages. They also have scaling advantages, and we think that it's important to, while we're still trying to understand what the opportunities are, and I think we're still in the early stages, try and learn as fast as possible. And that's what our approach has been around this, which is a multifaceted strategy from investments to internal incubation to even partnerships in the industry. And to your point, I think, to answer your question a little bit more directly, Citi is in some ways a microcosm of the financial system. We are very diversified and global, as you mentioned. So we are looking at things across institutional and the consumer bank. And we can go into more specifics a little later, but in the institutional bank, which is really where we started, we've been focused on cross-border international payments, and all of the customer business sort of problems that could potentially help solve. But obviously we're very invested in or very active, I guess I would say, in the market space, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, and more recently starting to do some really exciting experimentation both in consumer but even adjacent areas such as digital identity, and some of the other kind of related topics that are running in parallel to blockchain that I think is some of the most exciting potential of this.
Can you name another one? I only was able to get identity out of you. I want to be specific a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because when we started doing some research, actually, I'll mention this right now, is that one of the approaches that we've taken is through partnering. And I think right now in this industry, a lot of people are confused about how to partner effectively. That's one of the learnings, I guess I would say, is it's really difficult to partner. We think that there are actually many different approaches. All of them have their merits. One that I'll call out specifically related to identity is an initiative that we launched with some companies, including IDEO, the design firm, NASDAQ, Fidelity, and Liberty Mutual, and the list is continuing to grow, which started some early stage experimentation that led to this understanding in the middle of last year that digital identity is core to any blockchain opportunity. And so since the fall of last year, all the way up until this point and even going forward, that's informed some pretty significant opportunities that we see in the digital identity space, whether it's around efficiency, compliance obviously is a big place where people are looking right now, but even the opportunity to use that as a potential platform to extend or improve financial services in new ways.
Great.
We can go into details later, but
Thanks.
that's what I'd say.
Ed, what is the lay of the land at Deutsche Bank and what you're doing?
I'll separate that, William, into maybe how you start and maybe how we're organized today. That two quite different phases.
And why?
And why? And Jeremy touched on it. How do you start these pieces at large institutions? And on a topic like this that has a lot of history as well. It started a couple of years ago. So the observation on the informal stage and the formal stage. So at the beginning, getting people together. I think using the networks we have internal versions of Facebook that allow us to get together on particular subjects of interest, and senior leaders not just showing an interest, but I think promoting the topic. For us at Deutsche Bank, quite importantly, around it being a topic for the business. I think that transition from an interesting technology to what does it mean for the business model? Where do we expend our energy most effectively? I think there's a lot of projects that you have that we all see the graveyard of where lots of interesting technology projects that don't come to anything because they stayed as technology projects within large institutions. So a real strong focus on what does it mean from a business model perspective? What does it mean for our customers from the beginning? And a lot of informal workshops, interests, really funneling down, getting that filter to come to something concrete. Agreeing that we needed to move to the next stage, and so executing with partners some very lightweight projects. So this was the smart contract work on corporate bonds that we can talk about, but we posed business questions for that, not technology questions. We weren't testing scale and configurability. We were testing what it meant for the business model, for the representative vehicle that we had. And that leads us to where it sits today, which is that switch from a much more informal innovation path to a very formal structure, where we have we have a chief digital office in each of the major businesses within Deutsche Bank, and we have themes that go across them. This is one of those, one of many. And we make sure that not just we're in alignment on that, but we're pushing the right parts in the right divisions. And quite critically for us, the enabling piece, the hard bit, the partnering, how do you do that? We do that via our labs as well. They provide us with that environment and a way of working and a way of partnering that helps us to get those experiments done.
What's the level of visibility you think within the executive ranks at Deutsche Bank for the blockchain, and do they understand it very well?
I think like most firms, it's something, given its broad reporting in the media, it's a case of awareness, and then as Jeremy said, as you go down the levels, depending on the businesses that have specifically experimented, there's a greater degree of awareness.
Do you think your executives are learning from the media or from you internally?
A combination.
Is that a good thing?
I think it's good that there's, in particular, it's not just media and financial services. I think there's more interesting developments this year around the broader topic on digital currencies, the emergence of the application of this to other industries. Great having Bart here from Philips to show its more broader significance and a way of thinking about it.
Great. Let's move on. Jeremy, back to you. What did you learn? What have you learned in the last 2 years that you've done? Anything very interesting that you've done that, I think you mentioned you have a project called the Whitechapel Initiative. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and how did it help you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it touches on something much, much bigger, William, which is that, and we have talked about it, in fact, a number of people have talked about it, there is a major educational exercise here. It's less so now. It's quite extraordinary how in the space of 18 months, I suppose, I would frame it, when it first came onto my ken, but people have been dealing with this long before. The education piece is critical. And so you have this situation not just within your own institution, but actually within the ecosystem. So we have hundreds of things going on at the moment. One of the biggest challenges is, I know you want to come on to challenges shortly, William, but one of the biggest challenges is the number of things now happening across the group through our design center, through our accelerators across the piece, through customers that are pouring in through the door now, whether it's been our commercial bank, whether it's a retail bank or the investment bank, all asking for stuff. On top of all that, somehow or other, we've got to make sure that we see broadly this is a collaborative exercise. Collaboration is key to this. There will be competitive pieces as they come forward. What William was referring to, the Whitechapel think tank, we set up, when I say we, I came back from Boston and talked to somebody called John Edge, who some of you may know, who's another entrepreneur. And it just seemed that it would be a good idea to get the regulators, the government, and the private sector together in a room, just so that they could talk about this stuff. At that stage, it was very much a question of understanding what was going on and what was happening. It's very different now. And one of the things we learned was that one of the big challenges you have as a bank is when a customer comes to you and says they want to do business with you and they'd like to use your services, and then they mention that, for example, Bitcoin is part of their proposition. You have to understand that in the regulatory environment at the moment, there is a general sense of caution about Bitcoin. We've talked about this before. I think it's changing. It's moving forward. So the Whitechapel think tank, the banks came and said, look, somehow we've got to be able to bank these customers. And in that meeting of the Whitechapel think tank was the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA. And the FCA said, look, let's take this away. And they came back to the following meeting and said, the one message we need to convey to all of you is we do not want any of you stifling innovation. Would you please do all you can to encourage these customers to come to the table? And this wasn't the only reason, but the FCA then set up their sandbox. The Bank of England has consistently said, since then, we're listening. Of course we don't want you taking major risks that are going to upset the system, but there is serious material innovation going on here. And that led us to the next learning, if that's the right way to do it, William, which is that the British government is very pro this. and is keen to have this developed as much as possible. Fintech generally, but is now beginning to understand the sheer scale of the opportunities in blockchain for better government, for simply servicing the electorate. And so they have engaged much more through the Whitechapel think tank, but also bilaterally.
I like very much what you've done. Basically, what you've done is you've taken the conversation outside of the context of the bank proper, and you've raised the visibility and the awareness outside, and then brought more stakeholders from the community to move things forward. And I think that is a best practice that other locations, other geographies could probably take from. Bart, any quick learnings from the last few months that you've been involved in this?
Well, I think this comes from one of the challenges being the ecosystem is still so young, so it's really difficult to assess, okay, so which companies are we going to collaborate with? Also with all the media attention that is going on, that you want to act deliberately on the one hand, on the other hand, you want to communicate so people can come up to you and you can start collaborating. And I think that translates into you have to create a roadmap that has this aspirational goal on the one hand, but the steps you take, they are the biggest small steps you can take as to not alienate the people that you are working with. So basically you're trying to get people to the adjacent possible, and then they will start becoming your ambassadors. So we have some pretty good champions in our branding offices as well, really high up in the organization, that are really vocal about this because they think privacy is so important from a brand perspective. Our legal department is also very excited about this, and this initially surprised me because everyone kept telling me, oh, don't go talk to legal because they will shut you down immediately. But they immediately grasp the possibilities and how this could change the way we deal with data. And that is a big problem in healthcare right now. So they have a lot of work, and there's a lot of efficiencies that come from blockchain.
How many different partners do you have? You're working with some technology companies in the lab.
Yeah, so we have about 5 or 6 partners we are working with. Some of them are more vocal than others. No, and I think that's the role for Philips is, on the one hand, I think we could help drive this ecosystem, right? So it's really cool to work with startups. You have this energy in the room, and if they deliver on their promise, that's great. On the other hand, we have to be careful not to overpromise. I mean, we're a big company. We will work with a lot of partners.
So you're trying a number of things. That's the approach.
And I think we're also evaluating those partners as we go. So we're not only learning a lot about the technology, but also about the choices that are being made, the different platforms that are out there, the solutions, but also can we work with these teams?
Scott?
Just to build on that for a minute, turning it a little internal as well. So one of the things that I think a lot about is talent, right? Since we're building this for the long term, right? We're building a capability that we can leverage in the long term, and partnerships are critical to that, right? Leveraging startups, and we've made an investment in one, and is much about the talent and the individual and the thought leadership going on in that particular the Fluent is the investment we've made in that firm, as opposed to necessarily the product or where the product could go. Although it will. The issue internally is how do we find the engineers, right, that can get this, that can build this stuff, that can do it, and that can think in an open way. And I was really worried about that when we got started, because you'd go out and you'd look for talent, and you'd find, well, there's a 2x premium on every software engineer who puts blockchain in their resume, right? And it made me turn around and go into my LinkedIn profile and put it in real quick, right? So it's and you wouldn't believe the emails you get once you do that. But it is, we found that we could take great Java engineers that we already had internally, right? It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get their heads around it, to start banging around real code, rolling up the sleeves, doing stuff. And before you know it, you've created a real strong cadre of individuals that can execute. And that's what this is all about. It's about the execution piece.
So how many engineers do you have at Thomson that have the title blockchain in their...
The title blockchain?
Or have a blockchain in their title?
On their resume? Or on their title? No one's got it on their title, but not enough, right? We could always use more and are always looking within our organization for those engineers that want to come and build with.
But when it comes time to implement something, do you manage the engineers that will do it tomorrow, or do you have to go through another department and get it done?
So the idea behind applied innovation is that we're going to innovate on something, and we're going to build, and we're going to make something that's deployable, but it grows up, right? It grows up and it leaves the nest, as it were. So and our full expectation is when it leaves the nest, those engineers and those capabilities, some will stay, but some will go to the deployed piece.
Okay. Ian, what do you think?
Yeah, maybe I'll just sort of simplify our learnings in 3 areas, and this is the way that we look at driving growth and innovation, which is desirability, feasibility, and commerciality. And we have learnings in all 3 of those. So on the desirability point, I think, as many of you probably are starting to learn in your organizations, it's actually hard for many institutions to find where the opportunity is, where this technology really applies, where it provides a 10x improvement over existing solutions. That in itself is half the battle. And part of the problem is actually you can't necessarily always just approach it through frameworks or theories. You actually have to learn by doing.
Yeah.
And that gets to my second point around feasibility, which is the technology is still very, very nascent. In fact, some people believe that what ultimately will get adopted doesn't look much like what is in place today. And so I think you have to be along that journey, but also both through your own developers or engineers, which we've started to build up pretty strong expertise in, but also with partners. Whether they're technology companies, startups, or in the industry. For example, Chain.com is one of our portfolio companies, and we've been working with them very intensely over the last number of months. But working through those together to solve real business problems is when the true learnings start to come out, right? Around things that we're learning around scalability, security, privacy, digital identity. Those can only be discovered when you actually get deep into the issues and try to solve the problems that they're intended for. And then on the commerciality standpoint, which I think a lot of us are still a ways away from figuring out, but I think it comes down to partnering. Because ultimately, this technology is a network technology, as I mentioned. It requires other people to participate in that network. And so designing the right model with the right players, with the right and aligned incentives, whether it's governments, institutions, banks, or whatever, is actually very difficult. And so we've been using this approach that we like to call minimum viable ecosystem, which is what is the minimum viable ecosystem to actually make this thing real? And that's how we've been approaching the opportunity.
And those learnings, you kind of feed them back to the organization as a whole?
So a couple things that we do. I mean, our labs are specifically designed where the lab actually sits within most of the major engineering sites of the businesses. So typically when a innovation project, whether it's blockchain or otherwise, starts to, in some ways reach escape velocity and get closer and closer towards commercialization, we will transition it from the lab into the engineering center by wrapping it around with, support from outside resources, whether they're startups, contractors, or internal resources from the engineering team itself. And so, we're doing that in all areas of technology, but blockchain included.
Great. Ed, any more insights from?
Yeah, there's one I'd highlight, that the legal topic, I think, is a particular one of critical. It's a critical ingredient to this, and engaging them not just early, but the right. I think the engineering point, the right types of skills and profile mix from there is also a challenge. You're mixing together. So specifically for us on the smart contract side, you're mixing together some people with deep law backgrounds in contractual law, particularly on securities, with a computer science way of working, a way of unit testing individual clauses, which is not necessarily the day-to-day of what any of those deal with. I think that's not just the usual goodness of a cross-functional team, but it's also a learning of, you may not expect where the emphasis is. You may think we need lots of technologists, but actually from a business perspective, there are other skills mixes that you really need to look at when doing those, and that really helped us with two things. That first and foremost, in terms of involving them and thinking about their skills mix, but also secondly, it was a great opportunity by involving them and really getting the full product digitized, that you really start from somewhere very different. And I think that's one of the learnings out of this. We're very, very good at looking to automate what we've got today, make it faster, maybe make it cheaper. We often start halfway down the stack as well, because that's where the opportunity is perceived to exist, or we can see the issues, we can see the benefits we can bring to customers. But we rarely really get to start from a very different place and completely digitally.
That's a very good point, which is where do you insert the blockchain? Do you insert it at step number 7 out of 10 steps, so you're only barely changing something at the end? Or, as you said, do you start from the beginning? You put the asset. It's all about assets. You put the asset from day one, from the first second on the blockchain. So that was a learning from you.
Yeah, and there's definitely there's benefits in starting halfway down in some markets. There's a complexity slider around the number of participants, the complexity of the instruments, the complexity of the regulation involved, the number of people involved in the processing or value chain, however you describe it. And so I think there's different advances. Some markets are more electronic today, and there are real structural efficiency benefits further down that make more sense to start with. But there are many, many markets we're starting with, and I'd say not just starting digitally within financial services. We have large challenges that start very undigitally outside of financial services that are really critical to us today, and identity is the big one. And for me, that learning of really trying to not just look outside of where you start today with a product, but outside of where the industry starts with solving a solution, which is why the involvement of those other stakeholders is so important to us, really getting the benefit from it.
Okay, so quickly, this panel has gone so fast. Let's roll back quickly. I want to get a feel, like temperature-wise, between using the blockchain to do things better, faster, cheaper, which is the easier thing, versus looking out 2-3 years from now and being more strategic. So just quickly back this way, what's the mix of your activities and interest and attention on going for the low-hanging fruit or being more ambitious and saying, well, let's start with a blank sheet of paper? What's the mix, more or less?
So the mix today, William, is a bit of both. And the reason for that is when you look at in a business, you've got to make it real. And so a lot more of the practical questions, I think, are on the efficiency end, and they're about connecting to the real world, because it's got to do that.
And you have hope for both? Both are going to succeed?
Absolutely.
I think they both have to succeed.
Yeah, just different time frames.
One is more difficult than the other.
One is more difficult and takes...
What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we're so excited, and we think there's so much potential here, is that it actually can do both. It can solve problems that are very painful and exist today within the industry and our company, but also the unique aspects of the technology essentially make it a platform.
What are you afraid about? Anything really, really difficult that you think you're attempting to do that you're afraid about? You think it might fail, blockchain-wise? Are you taking ambitious projects? That's what I'd like to see more companies do.
Yeah, I mean, I think many people have probably seen some of the stuff publicly that we've been involved in related to payments and also on the market side. But I mean, I think, frankly, this is just, in general, a highly nascent technology that is still to be proven. So, frankly, it's not any one particular kind of use case or opportunity that we're going after that has more risk than another. It's actually just,
It's a portfolio approach.
yeah, it's
Ian,
the portfolio as a whole.
I use the word volatile, actually, right, from a technology perspective, and that's what makes it fun, right? And that's what makes the first panel this morning talked a little bit about this. That's what makes the basic use cases so important to get your hands dirty and understand what's going on.
Start there, and then before you can
Don't
run.
lose the vision, but you've really got to understand the nuts and bolts to make this what it can be.
Great. Bart, final words?
So I think there's the vision is answering the why question. So why are we building all these things that need to deliver value now? Because they are stepping stones towards something bigger.
So understand the why.
Yeah, you need to understand the why. At the same time, you don't want to alienate people saying, "Oh, this can never be done." So you're aiming to where the puck will be, and try to be as ambitious as possible. But there are deflated promises, right? So you need to be deliberate about that.
Sorry to interrupt. Jeremy, 20 seconds, last words to you.
So there is some stuff going on in the short term across our business, some of which may make it into the real big time. There's no question about that, whether it be supply chain finance or whether it be clearing and systems in the investment banking arena. I think the longer term issue is something we're all going to have to grapple with. Data has never been shared about us as individuals on this scale ever before. Data, identity, privacy, these are beginning to infringe on civil liberties.
Tough issues.
We are going to have to work together on this.
Yes.
Because one day someone will drop the ball and the retribution of the custodians of society will be pretty vigorous. And it's very important we have a structure to be able to take that forward. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, and I have to stay with it. In closing, I have a short announcement to make. And some of you know me as an investor, and some of you know me as an author. I've been writing a lot about the blockchain. And I've also this book, The Business Blockchain, which is launching today at the conference. And thanks for the generosity of CoinDesk and Consensus, the conference. We're going to be having the book outside for everybody to have a copy of. And since I've been watching Oprah for many years, I've always wanted to say this. And who wants a book on blockchain strategy? You're all getting a book on blockchain strategy. You're getting a book, and you're getting a book, and you're getting a book outside. At 11:30, Vitalik and I are going to be there. Vitalik wrote the foreword to the book. It's a book about blockchain strategy where you can learn and get new ideas. And Vitalik will join me at 11:30, and we'll sign the books for you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the panelists.
Thank you.
Very good. Thanks.